DNA analysis has uncovered how 24 wild English rabbits managed to pull off a giant Australian invasion in the early 1900s, more than a century after the pests were initially introduced. Researchers have long questioned how rabbits carried out the hostile takeover, which saw them spread to all corners of the country at a rate of 100 kilometers per year, the fastest colonization rate for an introduced mammal ever recorded. An international study, collaborated by researchers at the University of NSW, found a genetic pattern showing certain gene types are predisposed to be successful invaders. Read more. Resurrection of Aussie animal that's been extinct since 1936 planned. Who let the rabbits in? Rabbits were first introduced to mainland Australia when 5 domestic animals were brought to Sydney on the First Fleet in 1788. But historians believe the plague started at the beginning of the 20th century near Geelong, Victoria, after English settler Thomas Austin imported the wild animal from the UK over to his Barwon Park estate. More than 150 years have passed since Austin introduced the wild rabbits, and now research has revealed the genetic data highlighting how they came to wreak havoc across the continent, triggering Australia's most devastating biological invasion. We often lack detailed information and accounts on the sources of where animals come from, Mike Latnick from the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences at UNSW Science said. Read more. Wild boar numbers soar in Spain, forcing authorities to intervene, but in the case of wild rabbits in Australia, they are very well documented as one of the most successful biological invasions in the world. Recipe for destruction. The study revealed that most mainland Australian rabbits came from the single introduction of 24 wild rabbits by Austin. Researchers said that as the rabbits moved further away from Austin's estate in Victoria, genetic diversity declined, and rare genetic variants, the kind that occurs in rapidly growing populations, became more frequent. The time lag from the initial introduction of rabbits into Australia, and the lack of success before the arrival of the wild genotype in 1859 suggests it is specific genetic traits which acted as the trigger for the invasion. Austin's rabbits were wild, lacking tame character and fancy fur coats, which explains why the rabbits were better adapted to local conditions than earlier introductions. There are numerous traits that could make feral domestic rabbits poorly adapted to survive in the wild, but it is possible they lack the genetic variation required to adapt to Australia's arid and semi-arid climate, Professor Francis Jiggins, senior author from the Department of Genetics at the University of Cambridge, said. According to the study, the number of individuals, the number of introductions and environmental change can all contribute to a plague. But the new findings indicate the genetic composition of those animals can be just as influential. Read more. John Farnham's shock cancer diagnosis. Environmental change may have made Australia vulnerable to invasion, but it was the genetic makeup of a small batch of wild rabbits that ignited one of the most iconic biological invasions of all time, lead author Dr. Joel Alves said. We managed to trace the ancestry of Australia's invasive population right back to the southwest of England, where Austin's family collected the rabbits in 1859. Despite the numerous introductions across Australia, it was a single batch of English rabbits that triggered this devastating biological invasion, the effects of which are still being felt today. Read more. Police file terrorism charges against Pakistan's Imran Khan. Rabbit-proof fence. Rabbits remains a major threat to Australian native flora and fauna. Despite the construction of rabbit-proof fences and the deliberate introduction of the myxoma virus, wild rabbits cost the Australian agricultural sector an estimated $200 million per year. Researchers said the study is important in the future prevention of destructive plagues. These findings matter because biological invasions are a major threat to global biodiversity, and if you want to prevent them, you need to understand what makes them succeed, Dr. Alves, a researcher at the University of Oxford and Sibio Institute, said.